In this video, we're going to talk about the differences between basic and advanced when you're adding material. To do this, we're going to expand our display pane and we're going to edit the appearance that's applied to the entire SOLIDWORKS part. On the left-hand side, located in the properties in our feature manager, you'll notice that we have a few things that we can manipulate. The first section is color image. We have our selected geometry, which is the entire SOLIDWORKS part. Then we have a color section, and below that, we have display states. Now, display states we'll talk about in another video, but I want to focus on the difference between basic control and advanced control. Inside of basic control, we're grabbing a material from our material database, whether it's high gloss plastic or a metal or even wood grain, grass, sand. There's a lot of materials that we can take a look at. Really, the only thing that you can manipulate within the basic section is the color. We can change the color of the material, but still keep the material properties. You'll notice that there's a drop down for grayscale, pastels, and standard for the type of color. We can select certain colors, manually drag, or enter RGB values or HSV values. This is not usually a way that you would manipulate materials that you need for high quality renders or visualization, but it is a good way to change the color of certain parts if you want to differentiate them on the screen. Let's take a look at the advanced options. Under advanced options, we have a lot more that we can control. We still have the same control over the color of our part, but we now have control over appearance path files. We can also save an appearance if we need to. If we scroll down, you'll notice that we still have the options for display states as well. We have a difference on mapping, which is important when you're dealing with things like patterned appearances. If you have a patterned appearance, then you most likely are going to modify the mapping of it to suit whatever geometry you need. If we have illumination that we want to modify, the great thing about SOLIDWORKS illumination is the dynamic help. If you turn on dynamic help, when you hover over a certain option, such as diffuse amount, you get a descriptor on the right hand side as well as three images showing what the slider will do. In this case, diffuse will control the intensity of the light on a surface. The higher value makes the surface brighter. This is basically telling you that it will either absorb or omit light. It's good to have the dynamic help option, especially when you're learning what each section does. We have a lot of control over the material, but I would highly recommend that you use the standard materials whenever possible. When you get into modifying these material values, you can really open up a can of worms and you can really have a hard time getting a good looking material. For instance, when you start modifying the specular color, specular amount, and the spread and blurriness, it's very hard to get that material to be accurate to what you're expecting. We also have some surface finish options. In this case, we're dealing with just a color, but there are a lot of different options that we can use, such as wrought, chain link, knurled, diamond tread plate, and so on. And once we change that, we now have some mapping options because we're now using an appearance for mapping this material. We also have some options for the strength of the bump and also displacement mapping. It'll actually appear to have more depth to it, even though it's just a material that's applied to the surface and it's not actually adding any three dimensional geometry. You can actually make it look like it has three dimensions. Let's go ahead and take a quick preview of this. A lot of times when you're dealing with materials that are adding this three-dimensional aspect, you won't get a preview on the screen. You'll have to do a preview render or a final render to see it. But you'll notice that when we look at this preview render, we're actually getting what looks like a diamond plate material applied to our speaker. So this is a great way that you can really control the materials and you can tweak values. What you'll come to find is when you start modifying appearances, you'll have to modify things like composites in order to get those to look right on your model. You may be modifying the way that they're illuminating to give them a little bit more depth as if there's more clear coat on the outside. You might be modifying the surface finish to give it more or less bump strength if you want it to look smoother or look more rough. There are also materials such as solids, which will have certain things that you can modify to them if we expand down here. These will be a very dull color where you might actually want to come back and give them a little bit more reflection properties. You might want to give them a little bit more control over how they handle the light. Or we can go into things like fabrics. We have cloth fabrics where you might want to give it a little bit more bump strength or use displacement mapping to have it roll over the edges. We have organic things such as wood. You might have a very high gloss polished wood, or you might have a rough wood where you want to give it more texture. So, a lot of different options here, a lot of different things that we can manipulate and modify. And you'll come to find that when you start using a lot of these options, you're going to come into the advanced section and start manipulating things slightly to see if it gives you a better look for your final product.